Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 271 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is developing your strengths. Our quote of the day comes to us from Marilyn Vos Savant. Success is achieved by developing our strengths, not by eliminating our weaknesses. It's always exciting when I get to meet new people through our podcast. Ironically, I'd watched Jim Mecir pitch many times during his major league career, and it's an honor to have him on our show today. Jim shares some interesting perspective with us from his time as a major league pitcher, as well as his post-baseball career. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Jim, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Chris, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Every day, all the time. Always ready.
Such an easy question, but the reality is if everybody positively impacted one person, I think we'd be in a much better place. So, as you know, with our whole no quit theme and motto, the number one objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you wouldn't mind sharing your no quit story, or perhaps a really challenging time that tested you where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Sure, Chris. My no quit story is that I dreamt of becoming a Major League Baseball player, but the fact was that I was born with a club foot. So when I was a child, I had surgeries. I did the Ponseti method, had braces put on, but it really didn't work. So when I was about 7 years old, I needed to have my foot reconstructed. So my right foot is 2 sizes less than my left. My ankle's fused, and my calf is half the size of my left leg, and my right side is an inch shorter. That, and also the fact that I was a small kid all the way up till my junior year of high school, I never really thought of the fact that I could become a professional baseball player. I wanted to, it was a dream, but I never really gave it any thought until I went to high school and I grew, and all of a sudden I was throwing the ball 90 miles an hour. But from that point on, you would think that the early part was the hardest because you're a kid, you're different. The hard part was just that other kids looked at me a little weird because they'd see the leg and it was obviously different. But that was the only hard part of it. It was when I got to the point where I showed that I had the skills, but people would look at me different because I would constantly limp. My mechanics weren't good because I couldn't push off that leg. That right leg is my push-off leg off the mound. So I would stride a foot shorter than everybody else. I would pull off the ball, and I would get told many times, you can't throw like that. Your mechanics are bad. So just getting to professional baseball was a big deal. But I just kept pushing forward to get to the major leagues.
I think it's incredible how you touched on that, and I appreciate you sharing your backstory. And I think going through that, as you said, as a child, obviously kids can be the best supporters and also the worst critics, and especially at a young age. So I guess the follow-up question I have to that is, what was the hardest part post high school of realizing that you could pitch 90 plus miles an hour and getting to the point of being successful in high school to ultimately get to the major leagues, which obviously you did, and you succeeded at that level?
The hardest thing is that and this is a lesson I learned, and I think it's true in business, try to develop people and help them grow. Don't try to fix their problems. So I had too many coaches that were trying to fix me. There's a specific way to throw. Look at Greg Maddux. And I'm like, I'm not Greg Maddux. So I would constantly look at them and go, okay, and I would try what they would tell me to do for a little bit, and it was always, I'd start throwing slower. I just couldn't throw the way that they wanted me to because my body just wasn't physically able to do it. I had to throw the way I wanted to, or my body wanted to, and maybe make small little adjustments, and they even wanted to take away some pitches I threw because my mechanics were so bad. I couldn't throw a great curveball or slider. I tried so many different times. I tried every pitch in the book, And the only thing I really had was a good fastball and a changeup. And in college, my pitching coach there, he was, a great leader. His name was Rich Folkers. He was a former big leaguer. He threw a pitch called a screwball. Now, he always allowed me to do whatever. He never concentrated on my weaknesses. He always developed my strengths. And, a screwball is a weird pitch. It's a lot of people don't know what it is. A lot of people don't even believe it is a real pitch. I think it's just a glorified changeup, but it is a totally different pitch, and it's the pitch that got me to the big leagues. But meanwhile, after my college career, a lot of the coaches along the way would tell me, you can't throw that pitch. It's gimmicky. If you throw it to a right-hander, it's going to break into the bat and you're going to kill it. So it was a lot of that, even in high school when I was going to be drafted, they kind of looked at me like, this kid's got great talent, but, he's limping all over the place. The mechanics aren't good. And so I didn't get drafted out of high school because I knew I was going to be a very late pick, and I told them I'm going to college.
No, I think it's so important, the coaches and the influential people we have in our lives. And you said something that I wanted to just touch on for a second is by not focusing on the weaknesses, but really developing those strengths. I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just touching on that for a second and the importance of that, because I think certain people miss that, and it's not just in sports or baseball. It's in business, it's in personal life, it's in relationships. The focus of not dwindling their strengths by dwelling on the weaknesses. So I wanted to just see if you wouldn't mind touching on that for a second.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the whole point is when you're good at something, it's easier to make them better. When you're bad at something or it's not a strength, it's hard to improve on it. So they would constantly be trying to fix my mechanics the way, that's conventional that other people are good at, but I wasn't good at that. So I think that's the same thing in life. If you have weaknesses, and especially if you're on a team, then you let somebody else do that, whatever it is, right? And you concentrate on what you're strong with and what suits you.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really key, like you said, in business as well as life. So I wanted to ask you, Jim, if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today.
Sure. Today, I guess that was my second no quit story. I was deadly afraid of speaking, and I became a professional speaker. I also took improv classes, which I thought would never happen, and I partnered with somebody. Her name's Schnur, and we combined baseball and improv to make Improv Talk. And in a nutshell, we're really just trying to make teams work better together. And right now, at this time, it's very hard in quarantine and the COVID-19. We are doing little things called seventh inning stretches. It's more like a timeout for people, let loose, have some fun. But it also has some learning points in there. We're doing one called Resiliency and Change, and one called Get Connected. And if anybody's interested in that, they can contact us. The first one's on us.
No, that's really cool how you're doing that. And I think you and I were speaking before we went live, and you shared a story with me about how you received an award when you were a professional pitcher, and you gave a minute and a half speech, and to your words, you said you flubbed it, and at that point said, I'm never doing it again. And I think so many people have this fear of speaking and being in front of people, and I'm not going to flub the statistics, but I know that fear of public speaking is one of the most feared things out there.
There's no doubt. I can remember that vividly. It was 2003, so it was 17 years ago, and I could still picture it in my head. I was receiving, it's called the Tony Conigliaro Award, and it's given to the player that overcomes adversity through the spirit of courage and determination. And I had to go to Boston to receive the award, and there's 500 people there. I'm up on stage. I'm one of the last speakers, and I was the whole day before. I'm following my wife in the mall in Boston, just going over the speech. It's like a minute and a half, but I'm struggling with it. I'm like trying to memorize it. I get up on that stage finally. I give about 30 seconds of it, and then I make mistake of looking up past that first kind of row, and I see all those people, and I just blank. And it was probably only for 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt like 15 seconds. And then I muttered a couple of other things, said thank you, sat down, and I'm just like, I'm never speaking again until I joined Toastmasters.
So I appreciate you sharing that story, and I'm glad that you mentioned Toastmasters. Toastmasters, for maybe any of our listeners that don't know, it's a organization, a public speaking organization. It's not only throughout the United States, but it's throughout the world as well. And I've been a part of Toastmasters myself, and I think it's something that's fascinating to do, and for many different reasons. And I know I've been in a couple different groups at different locations, and there are people that do speaking, there are people that speak for their job, their career, for their hobby, but there are also a ton of people that have been in the classes that I've been involved with that don't do public speaking. They just wanted to get better at it. So I think for any of our listeners that maybe have not heard of it, or maybe would look to and are interested in becoming a better speaker, it's I think it's toastmasters.org, but it's a really great organization. Are you still involved with it today, or no longer?
I do stuff once in a while for them, but my kids became that age where I'm a taxi driver, and I kind of didn't have the time anymore to make those meetings.
No, I definitely, my kids are younger, but definitely it's starting. So, question we ask everybody is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Resilient. And there's a couple of different reasons. I don't know. And I don't know if, to me, resilience, I think it's inborn, but I think you also build it. And I don't know if I was given more early on, or the fact that I had to deal with something early on that made it stronger. But I even know my pain tolerance for physical things is just a lot higher than other people. I mean, I've had 9 surgeries now. I ruptured my left patella tendon, ruptured my quad muscle in that leg, had the club foot surgery. I had an olecranon non-union in my right arm, so it snapped in half and it needed to be pinned and wired. And this was during my career. And I also tore both rotator cuffs on my left and right shoulder and had surgery. So I've always had to, besides the club foot, it was always something. And even after that, the hardest part now for me is, besides all of that, is the problem that this club foot has given my body, because now I have constant hip back problems that I'm always dealing with. So the other ones sound more glorified, but right now it's probably, at this age, this is the hardest thing that I'm dealing with on a daily basis.
No, you've definitely had your fair share of surgeries along the way. And I think to your point earlier in that last answer is, I think what you dealt with early on in life, I think it definitely built your resiliency. And I think to your point, I think it's something that you can improve and build on. I'm sure there are science and studies done that people that maybe come from different areas have more resilience in some way, but the reality is, as you go through life and as you go through challenges, and the reality is we all get knocked down. The question is, do we come back a better version? And obviously, I think anytime you do or have a surgery, the whole hope is to come back better, stronger, and repair whatever that injury or need is. So one of the things that we often discuss is the importance of self-improvement. And I was curious if you've read anything recently, or perhaps you're reading something currently that you'd like to recommend possibly to our listeners.
Oh, well, it's so funny because you say you're a John Gordon fan, and I went to high school with him. I've pretty much read all his books except for his new ones. I love all his books, every single one. There's not one specific one. I'm the biggest fan of the Energy Bus just because that's his first one, and I kind of like, it's kind of that way for me because my big league debut is my favorite. So I always liked that when I first heard that he wrote a bestseller, and it was that one. I love that, the Energy Bus. But any of his books are great. There might be like 17 of them right now. As far as books, I've gone back to science fiction now for fun during this quarantine. So I haven't read any of the business books or psychological books. It's more fun reading for right now.
So follow up that is there anything in the science fiction genre that you've read recently that you'd like to recommend? Sure.
It Bleeds by Stephen King. And right now I'm actually reading the prequel to Hunger Games. Now I just started, so I forget what it's called. Songbirds and something else, I forget.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate you sharing that. So one of the things we just discussed, and a question I ask, and I'm curious, if I had the ability to grant you dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick?
Oh, God, that's a... the funniest thing is it has nothing to do with sports. I think the person that everybody should want to be or see most in life is Mother Teresa. I just think that is just an unbelievable story of somebody just giving themselves to the world and not caring, and even makes the story stronger is that later in life she doubted her faith but still kept going. So to me, she is one of the most remarkable people in this world.
I think that would be a fascinating dinner. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself just one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't listen to that voice in your head, that negative voice. It is not real. It's, on one hand, it's a historian that's just telling you things that happened before that you failed out in the consequences, or, it's some kind of soothsayer telling you what could happen in the future, and none of it's true. And I didn't learn that lesson until I was about 30 in the big leagues, and I know it could have made my career a lot better, especially in the early years, if I could have learned to really focus on a pitch at a time and not think about all the variables that I can't control.
That's such an important perspective, is the variables you can't control. We often talk about controlling the controllables, and I think so many professional athletes in all different sports have spoken about the hardest enemy that they've ever faced is the one above in their head, because when you put in the time and the effort in the weight room, running, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, fill in a sport, ultimately that you can do that. You can pitch, you can make that shot, you can throw that football. But it's that voice inside, and I think it's the mental perspective. So I guess it may be a difficult question, but what was it at the age of 30 that really clicked in regards to that for you?
Well, that's a long story, so I'm going to shorten it as much as I can. I was on the mound. I was playing for the Oakland Athletics. We were in Seattle. It was 2000, and we were fighting for one of the last playoff spots. It was one of those days where you wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I suck. My screwball's no good. I'm facing A-Rod. I'm facing Edgar Martinez, Ricky Henderson, all these guys. So I was just mentally low. And I didn't want to pitch, basically. Tim Hudson was pitching. I was star pitcher. And I'm like, good. I'm thinking, go, Tim, pitch the whole game. Well, I got in a little bit of trouble in the seventh inning, and I came into the game, and that mindset was screwing with me. And, Ricky Henderson came up, and I threw him some really bad pitches, but I got him out, luckily. I walked the next guy, and I knew that I was in trouble because I was just so emotionally low. And Alex Rodriguez steps up to the plate with the bases loaded, and we're winning by a couple of runs, and there's only one out. And I get on that mound, and I don't change my mindset, but something all of a sudden deep inside of me just started cursing at me. It's like, what are you doing? You've done this your whole life. It doesn't matter if Babe Ruth's up there, right? Just take the ball and throw it. So at this point, I'm pitching with anger, but it's better than fear. So I get on the mound, and I proceed to strike out A-Rod and then Edgar Martinez to end the inning, and we end up winning the game, and we clinched the playoffs on the last day of the season. But I know if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have got both of those guys out, because what happened is after that, all I was doing is looking at the glove, determining what pitch I want to throw. I just brought it back to basics. I wasn't worried about everything else around me. And I took that with me the rest of my career, and I put up some decent numbers, but if I didn't learn that lesson, I don't know if I would have stayed in baseball, because I had so many injuries and I was always hurting that even though I was physically wasn't as good, now I was mentally stronger. That's
an awesome story, and I appreciate you touching on that for our listeners. And I think that's one of the best part about this podcast is asking some of those questions. And I think anytime a guest can share a story and actually put some context behind what it is, I think it's so important. You said something that stood out to me is the fact that you went back to your basics. And I think there's I forget, there's a baseball movie with Kevin Costner where he's the pitcher. I think he's on the Orioles and he's pitching at Yankee Stadium, and all of a sudden he just focuses and the crowd goes from incredibly loud and all he sees is John C. Reilly, who's his catcher. Do you know that name of that movie?
I don't know the name, but he pitched for Detroit, and he was going for a perfect game, I believe, it was a perfect. Was it called the perfect game? Maybe. I'm
not sure, but it's interesting. No, I remember. Thank you. It was Detroit. But my point of that is similar to what you just shared. Is he was focusing on what he can control, and it was obviously a movie, and you can't always turn out the noise, but it was really fascinating because every time he needed to make a big pitch or get a big out, all of a sudden it just got really quiet, and all he saw was him and his catcher. And going back to what you said, not only back to the basics, but also going back to controlling the controllables. He couldn't control the crowd. He couldn't control who was up next or who wasn't up next. He could control on that pitch and the next pitch. So I'm really glad you shared that. One of the things we talk about is the word accountability, and I wanted to get your perspective on what accountability means to you, or how do you personally define accountability?
Well, accountability, I think a lot of people think is just means them. Are they accountable? I think in order to be successful as teams, you need to be accountable to other people. Like we talked about before, everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. This is one of the things that I didn't learn that well during my career. I guess the generation I grew up in, being a good team player was, show up on time, try your best, lead by example, all those things. But, as you get older, you realize that that's not just it. It's also being a motivator and helping other people. So it's holding those people accountable as well. And I think that's a problem in business. I think a lot of teams waste a lot of time, a lot of productivity because people aren't held accountable. There's a lot of blaming, backstabbing, and all that stuff. And it's really simple. If you treat people the way you want to be treated, it really works out well. It's not that hard. And if you hold yourself accountable, doing your work and not making excuses, you're gonna. And if everyone on the team does that, you can have a great team.
Yeah, I think that's super key. Is it's about not only holding yourself accountable, but also being accountable to other people. And I think when you do that, whether it's a sports team, a business organization, a family, a relationship, when both people or multiple people are being accountable themselves, but also holding each other and making sure that those people are being held accountable as well, I think that's the difference of, to your point, a good team versus a great team versus the best team.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I know I've seen sports teams that, they didn't gel that well win, but that's pretty rare. It's usually the team that comes together. And I think, especially in sports where momentum's big, your team has to be, coming together at its top of its game.
No, that's so important. I think you try to time it perfectly, obviously, going into the end of a season or in a business meeting when you have that huge sales opportunity. You want to hit everything on the right speed and have everything gel. So we're going to change lanes into what we call our hot seat questions. And the only thing we ask of you is you just spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Last meal, you could pick absolutely anything to eat. What do you pick?
Crab legs.
Favorite smell?
Springtime.
I think I know the answer to this one, but favorite sport?
Well, it's baseball, but football's a close second.
All right. What is your all-time favorite team?
God, it was the Yankees. Now it's tough because, okay, if we're not going to say baseball, then I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay, there we go. Do you have an all-time favorite movie?
That one's tough too. I'm off the top of my head, I'm just going to go Shawshank Redemption.
Okay.
Or Rudy. Actually, no, I'm changing it to Rudy. Sorry.
Yes.
My number's 45 because of Rudy. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Really?
Sorry. Yes, it was. I was 23 because I was a Don Mattingly fan, but then I had to keep changing it going up through the major leagues because other people had it, and I was 54 with the Yankees, and then I saw Rudy, and I'm like, I'm 45.
That's awesome. Do you have an all-time favorite quote?
You know what? The funny thing is, it's the other day I watched it in a Rocky movie, and I try to think about it. It was and it's so Rocky, so it's so cheesy, but it was, I think, one of his last movies. It was something like, it's not how hard you hit, but it's how hard you can get hit and still get up.
Yeah, that's one of his, and there's a bunch of YouTube videos with that quote, and I think it's a fantastic quote because it's so true in all aspects of life. All-time favorite book?
Battlefield Earth.
Do you have a favorite singer, band, or group?
Oof. No, I just appreciate the 70s and 80s music.
If you were stuck in a foxhole and you could only pick one person to have your back, who would it be?
Oh, my wife.
So, second to last question is, if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners where they can find you, where they can find out some information about what you're doing with Improv Talk, and then are you active on social media?
Yes, you can contact me at Jim Mecir at improvtalk.com. The website is improvtalk.com, or Jim Mecir at gmail.com, or jimmecir.com.
And are you active on social media as well?
I am, and I don't know if I have all that information. I'm so used to being on it, I don't even know my handles and stuff.
Well, we'll put them in the show notes, and then
you know what? It's going to be. It will be on the information I gave if they go to the website.
Okay, awesome. So improvtalk.com.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then last question we have for you is if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Yes, I think the biggest thing for me, and I think should be for other people, is don't let other people tell you what you can and cannot do. And at the same point, be a realist. And I say that because I love the fact that you don't want to let other people tell you what you can and can't do. But then early on, when my wife used to watch, what is that show, the singing show?
American Idol?
American Idol, yeah. And you watch those people, you would hope that somebody would tell them that maybe it's time to stop. So you have to realize your own abilities besides not letting other people tell you what to do.
I appreciate it. I think that's great advice. Don't let other people tell you what you can or can't do. Jim, I truly appreciate you spending some time with us, and I hope that you and I can connect again soon.
Sounds good, Chris. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to episode number 271. Although I have never been a professional athlete myself, I know many athletes speak about the importance of their mental composure as well as their self-talk. I'm appreciative of what Jim shared with us today concerning that. Something he said I thought was spot on, getting back to the basics. At times I think we have all gotten away from those basics. So my challenge to you today is just that. Get back to your basics. There might be other ways or distractions on how to achieve something faster, quicker, or even easier. But most of the time, those shortcuts don't last. So pick one area to improve on and get back to the basics. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.